Alright, hello. We're here today again, back with our Firelord Azula CEH list. After 3 weeks of testing, we've made some modifications, and I think last time the deck tech came out a bit rough, so we're just gonna go for a second round and kind of review some of the changes we made after some active playtesting. So again, we're playing with Firelord Azula as our commander, our 4 mana 4/4. With Fire Breathing 2, who copies any spells that are cast during the combat step, as hopefully you know by now. So overall, my findings over the past few weeks is that Azla is a fine Grixis commander. The deck as a Grixis pile does function fairly well with or without her, but what is quite apparent is that she's quite difficult to cast reliably on turn 2 because of those 3 Grixis pips. This is not like Rogsai, which can easily produce the pips necessary for Rog and doesn't really, well, in that he doesn't cost mana, and Silas rarely gets cast. So because of that, I've tuned the mana rocks a little bit. You'll notice in this iteration when we get down to the mana sources that I've changed them up a little bit in order to better facilitate a more consistent turn 2, or at the very least turn 3 Azula, which is what you should be aiming for in hands that are not going for an alternate game plan of casting one of your card advantage engines. So the first major change, of course, we'll go down into the combo section here, is in terms of how we win the game. So you'll notice I've cut the Frantic Search Narset's Reversal package and trimmed down to basically just Oracle Consults and variations of Underworld Breach, Brain Freeze, Lion's Eye Diamond. Of course, you can substitute the Lotus Petal in this list, but I'm not running a grinding station. So the reason for cutting Reversal Frantic Search, even though it's quite good in terms of fixing your mana and kind of just winning with those 2 cards in your hand if you can get into combat, with Narset is just that it's incredibly clunky. Narset's Reversal being 2 blue pips um, makes it awkward to cast, and even though it is technically a counter spell that can steal ad nauseams and stuff in the pod, I just found it wasn't that useful of a card overall. And yeah, mainly just the blue pips, hard to cast. And Frantic Search as well, pretty functional card, but not card advantage unless you have Firelord Azula out, in which case it's only card neutral. And then it's also 3 mana and 2 mana for when you're nosing, so the high CMC of the combo also kind of put me off it. Other than that, no major changes. I've listed Yawgmoth's Will and Final Fortune as kind of combo outlets as well, since you can use Final Fortune to combo off after a big Necropotence hand sculpt. Oh, Necropotence belongs in here. I guess I have it listed in our draw engine, so that's not really how you win. And the only other notable change I've made is that I've moved Invoke Calamity into the main board uh, by trimming some CMC elsewhere, just because I think Invoke Calamity is an incredibly powerful card with Azula in the combat step. Just the ability to get 2 copies of it and cast up to 4 spells from either yard or hand, but more importantly, Azula has a very hard time, or a relatively difficult time making pips that aren't red. And Invoke Calamity, while it does have 4 red pips, you get 2 of them for free in the combat step, which makes casting Invoke Calamity relatively easy. And then you don't have to pay the mana costs for any of the spells you cast off of it and copy off of it, hopefully, if you're casting Invoke Calamity during the combat step. So this lets you cast, like, a Beseech the Mirror, which is another card I've added to the list in the tutor section, for its triple black pips. Sorry, let me find it. Yeah, so it lets you cast something like a Beseech the Mirror from your yard or from your hand without having to pay those 3 black pips. Um, Similarly, a card like Electro Dominus will also let you cast spells that you wouldn't otherwise be able to find pips for using just red mana. And of course, Electro Dominus plus Tainted Pact with Electro Dominus for X equals 2 lets you copy in the combat step will let you have 2 copies of Electro Dominance. First copy casts pact which gets copied. Your first pact copy finds Thoracle, your second pact copy exiles your library, your original Electro Dominance resolves with Thessa's Oracle now in your hand, and now you win the game with an empty library. So those are the three main combos in the list. The basic Demonic Consultation Thoracle, Electro Dominance Tainted Pact Thoracle, and Lion's Eye Diamond Breach, Brain Freeze that remain. For my card advantage suite, hasn't changed much. We have the Ristic Mystic draw engines, and then we have the Ad Nauseam Necropotence win conditions that we're actually trying to go off with. So I've been finding that in my testing, Necropotence is the slightly stronger of the two. Ad Nauseam, you just tend to see less cards, but Ad Nauseam does have the advantage of you being able to cast it on an end step and then untap with your mana, whereas Necropotence, I would say this particular list, because you don't have that much access to free mana, sometimes you're casting Necropotence without Azula being on the board. So, and because we don't have access to Mox Amber, or say like a Sacrifice or Culling the Weak kind of effect in this list, and we don't have that much fast mana, relatively speaking. Like I'm on Vault Ring, Petal, Diamond, Chromox, Mox Opal, but I'm not on any of the red rituals other than Spirit Guide, Rite of Flame, any of the 1 mana rituals that go plus. I'm not on any of the 2 mana rituals in red, so I cut Desperate Ritual, and I'm not on Seething Song, I'm only on Cabal Ritual. But we have a Strike It Rich now, which is mana neutral, but it's mainly for fixing. So because of that, your Necropotence turns, along with your Flash Enablers, are relatively less powerful, so they're kind of close. But these remain. Other than that, we've added some draw advantage pieces here. So if you move up to Azula value draw, these are just things that are nice to cast while Azula's out on the board. You'll notice I've cut some of the more expensive ones. Like last time I had a Tidal Barracuda and a Aboleth spawn at certain points during that time in this list. They've been cut just because I've trimmed down and trying to go towards more of a storm build so that if you have to manually storm, you can go up a little more easily. So abandoned attachments made it into the list. So this is just another draw two, discard one outlet similar to demand answers. Now, Thrill of Possibility is actually slightly better than abandoned attachments because you'll notice that um, upon resolution, you have to discard a card on abandoned attachments, which means instead of discarding one and drawing 4, you have to draw 4, discard 2 with abandoned attachments compared to Thrill of Possibility. But I do find the hybrid cost of blue and red of abandoned attachments is pretty useful, and in a pinch, it also pitches the Force of Will, which is like very small upside. So you can kind of pick and choose which one you prefer between the two, based on where you want to get your minor edges. If you think discarding that one extra card when you're drawing 4 is more or less relevant, then occasionally being able to pitch the Force and being a blue card for like your Chrome Mox, that kind of thing. But yeah, the Fairy Mastermind and Orchestra Bowmaster did manage to stay in the list, though I did have a couple of moments where Fairy Mastermind almost got me in a bit of trouble when we were going for a Thoracle Consult kill. There was a Esper Sentinel out on the board, and someone tried to make one of my opponents draw because I was winning on their end step. And yeah, they tried to make me draw from an empty library, so just something to be aware of. And then Stock Up remains as my Singleton Sorcery card advantage piece in the place of Wheel of Fortune. It's been testing pretty well for me in terms of just finding the right cards. 5 cards in two of 5 cards is just like a pretty good rate in this list. As for the defensive interaction suite, this is what it currently looks like. No major changes, still running quite a few of the redirects. There's one here, and then listed in our offensive interaction, the modal spells are also there. But I've also moved on to Vexing Bauble, so this is currently taking the place of my Red Elemental Blast. Now, in certain metagames, you might prefer to run both Red Blast and Pyroblast, but I'm currently playing in a kind of slower mid-range metagame that doesn't actually have as many blue decks. Been playing into a lot of stacks decks actually, and then sometimes there'll be the occasional other blue player in my pod, or like a 5-color deck that has some blue spells with some counter magic. But overall, I haven't been getting that much utility out of Red Blast, so I've just made the swap for Vexing Bauble. So Vexing Bauble might seem a little awkward for a kind of turbo Grixis strategy, but it is actually quite powerful for protecting your wins when you're trying to go off, waiting for your correct window. You just wait for your opponents to kind of tap out, and then you can slam a Vexing Bauble, and that kind of means like outside of activated abilities from Otawara and Boseiju and that sort of thing, if they're tapped out, they shouldn't be able to really interact with you. You won't get punked by some random Force of Will, Fierce Guardianship, Deflecting Swat while your Bauble is in play. And so you can kind of map your turn around having the Vexing Bauble in play. Just don't cast any of your free spells into the Bauble until you kind of like spat out all your rituals, made all your mana, done all your other things, and then at that point you can crack your Bauble as needed. Another option I considered for this defensive slot was actually Defense Grid. I've run Defense Grid in my Rakdos lists before, which have less options and a little less overall velocity just because they lack blue. Or maybe I shouldn't say velocity, but just less options. Which is a 2-mana artifact that says whenever players cast a spell not on their own turn, it costs 3 more. And so that 3 mana basically prohibits your opponents from casting spells in your turn, more or less, in most scenarios. Sometimes if it's a very, very long game, it won't be a guaranteed defensive piece. But the problem with defense grid is that if you do somehow get stopped by like a Boseiju or an Otawara, now the defense grid stays in play 100%. You don't have any option to like crack it, unlike Vexing Bauble. So if one of your opponents tries to go off and win after your win attempt, your other opponents won't necessarily be able to stop them anymore because your defense grid is still in play, gatekeeping them from casting spells. Flash enablers haven't changed. And I think last time we went over the gifts package as the final win condition, so I guess technically there are 3, but the gifts package does just win through Oracle Consult, but just have it neatly packaged here. Gifts and given. If you can force through a copy in combat, it's even better. You don't have to do the gifts combo itself in combat, but you'll get a copy of gifts. And you can gift for gifts for 4 pieces of free interaction, so you can gift for like Pact plus Force plus Fierce if you have your plus Fierce plus Deflecting Swat if you have your commander out, or if you have access to 1 mana, then you can go for like Fluster, Swan Song, Force, Pact of Negation, or Offer, that kind of thing. Right, but the basic package is gifting for Snapcaster, Reanimate, Demonic Consultation, Thoracle. They'll probably give you Snapcaster, Thoracle. That's the most mana intensive line, in which case you'll have to cast Thoracle, then cast Snapcaster, target Demonic Consultation, flashback Demonic Consult. So that's the blue, 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 colorless black 5 mana pile, but conveniently, gifts cost 4 mana. So if the next turn if you gifts on end step, assemble the combo, then just play a land, you'll have 5 mana. Now onto our mana engines. Ragavan and Bergi have stayed, but you'll note I cut Electro from the list. The double red pips weren't too awkward, but I was just finding there wasn't enough impact. And you'll also note I've actually cut Stormkiln Artist in this iteration. So Stormkiln is incredibly powerful and is synergizing with what you're doing. It's possible that it's actually better than Vivi, because the damage from Vivi is not that relevant, and you only get 1 pop from Vivi. You can't like store the mana over time, unlike you could with Stormkiln. And Vivi is a blue pip, but Vivi also comes down a turn earlier, or for a mana less at least, compared to Stormkiln, and does offer like at least some kind of very, very, very tertiary win condition in terms of just manually storming with Vivi, which is not unheard of, to be honest. You get games with Vivi where you see him dealing like 10 plus, 20 plus damage almost if he stays on the board long enough, and then he gets quite large himself, right? If you cast 10 spells, he's a 10 power wizard. So I've been leaning in towards Vivi, and again, like he's blue, he pitches a force. and he's better to put under Chrome Mox. But I can totally see you keeping Stormkill underneath. But this is what I've trimmed the mana sources down to, so I've gone from 5 creatures to 3. And that's kind of one of the spots where I've been trimming the converted mana cost so I can put in a game-ending spell like Invoke Calamity, which just has incredible synergy. And moving down onto the mana rocks, so I've cut one of the signets and moved on to, or cut one of the talismans, sorry, specifically Talisman of Curiosity in my case, because I find like the black pip producing talismans are the most important. And I've switched over to running all 3 signets instead. And this is because like the signets give you the ability to filter colorless mana or like mana of any color, generic mana, into the 2 specific colors, and the signets just help a lot with getting a consistent turn 3 Azula, turn 2 Azula. That way, because let's say I'm playing off an Ancient Tomb, and Ancient Tomb plus a signet, it makes 2 colors, whereas an Ancient Tomb plus a talisman still only makes 1 color at a time. So these just get you a lot of the way closer um, towards your casting your Azula. Sorry, I was looking at a small error there. And yeah, like I mentioned briefly before, I cut the red rituals, but I did move on to Strike It Rich. Strike It Rich is just like a nice 1 mana early ramp piece. So you can, it's kind of like a Ragavan basically. Obviously the ceiling isn't as high as Ragavan, but it's just a nice consistent way to ensure you get that turn 2 or turn 3 Azula. And potentially if you're casting it off Yogg Will, you can use Strike It Rich to filter red mana into any color of mana. And it has a nice strike flashback cost if you're really doing nothing. Other than that, no additional major changes. In the offensive interaction package, I don't think I've added anything here. Last Agni Kai is still here. It's been testing fine enough for me as a ritual, but it's possible if you find that in your metagame the creatures are too large, there's no small creatures for you to roast with Last Agni Kai, so you don't actually plus 1 mana with it, then I can totally see cutting it for just like a desperate ritual, or maybe just like another interaction piece of your choice. You could run Pyroblast in this slot instead if you want to use this slot to kill creatures, or another card I've considered in the kind of creature removal suite. Because a creature like Archon of Emuria or any other stacks creature like Dranic Magistrate can be annoying, is Unholy Heat actually, because you shouldn't have too much trouble getting Delirium in this list, and doming 2 creatures for 6 damage can be quite powerful. So I would consider Unholy Heat or a Ritual, depending on which way you're leaning towards in that slot. Otherwise, we have Untimely Malfunction, which also doubles up as a defensive spell. Still running Into the Flood Maw. Uh, there are potential situations where you might consider running Chain of Vapor, just because it can bounce your own permanents. You can like bounce your own Necro if it's no longer useful, though typically you can just respond to the triggers it generates as you exile. And yeah, moving down to this part of the list. I think last time I was on 0 sweepers when I brought the list, but I've moved back up onto 2 sweepers, both of which are instant speed. The first is Fire Covenant, which is a card I've run in my Rakdos lists before. Just a nice instant speed sweeper. Because of Azula, you get the chance to double it in combat. So if you're really greedy, you can pay half the life you normally would and sweep the board. Or if you're scared of them having counter magic, which is most often the normal punish, quote unquote, for someone casting a Fire Covenant, um, you can pay the requisite amount of life necessary to wipe the board in its entirety, and then you'll get 2 copies of the effect, so you can just overkill every creature. And that way they'll need 2 counter spells to stop you from sweeping the board. Secondarily, because my metagame is so choked with creatures, I'm currently running Fire Magic. So Fire Magic is pretty interesting because it's a sweeper that only pings you for 1 off of Adnals, which is great. And then if you choose not to pay any additional costs, or if you just choose, I guess, Fire as your additional cost on both your copies, if you're casting it in combat, you get a standard Pyroclasm, like 2 damage to each creature, or 1 damage to each creature twice, rather, in combat for just 1 mana, which is actually a great rate with Azula. And similarly, so there's a whole bunch of 3 mana deal 2 effects that exist, including like I think I was looking at a couple of them like Fuel the Flames and some of the other instant speed ones. But the problem with these instant speed effects is that because they deal 2 damage, if I copy them, they deal 4 damage and that kills the Azula, which is not something that I want. However, with Fire Magic, what you can do is you can cast Fire Magic, and then for either the copy or the original, you can pay the original cost of Fira, pay that 2 extra mana to deal 2 damage, and then not pay any additional costs for the original copy or the copy or whatever. And so you'll have one copy dealing 1 damage to each creature, and the other copy dealing 2 damage to each creature, and you get that 3 damage sweeper effect at instant speed that you're looking for with Azula. There's some pretty good synergy, and as well, it still has those manual cast modes of being able to 3 mana instant speed without Azula, Pyroclasm the board, and 6 mana deal 3 damage to every creature. So I've just been finding to be a pretty good flexible sweeper overall. Moving into the tutor slot, not too much has changed. I have added Beseech the Mirror just because it has pretty good synergy with Invoke Calamity. It is kind of hard to cast, but at the same time, we are still running Dark Ritual, Cabal Ritual to cast Necropotence and Ad Nauseam anyway, so it's not too bad. And Beseech bargaining for some of our like just Beseech bargain for gifts basically just wins the game and is just like an extra tutor. We don't have a huge amount of card advantage engines here, so uh, basically when we're doing our mulligans or opening hands, we are looking for a tutor of sorts, and Beseech, while it is hard to cast, it is a pretty powerful tutor. And so it makes the cut. And outside of that, we have 27 untagged lands. I don't think I made any changes to the actual land base. I think my only criticism was that I'm running a Thundering Falls as a surveil land. So some people will opt not to run a surveil land at all, but if you're going to run one, I think it should actually be Undercity Sewers. I'm going to continue testing with Thundering Falls. I think it needs to be a blue surveil land, but it's probably supposed to be the blue-black one, not the blue-red one. And yeah, other than that, this is the sideboard. Mostly these are cards that are almost there. I was testing Ral for a bit, and then I was looking at Storm of Memories, but these two are more like Ral cards in and of themselves. And then as well, I was looking at Deadly Dispute in the place of those like Azula value engine cards, because Deadly Dispute does make a treasure as well as draw 2 cards, which is extremely attractive. However, the additional cost of sacrificing an artifact or creature, well, artifacts is usually going to be fine. You only actually have 14 artifacts in the list, not counting some random treasures from some other sources. And creatures, we trimmed down on creatures, so there's definitely not going to be an abundance of bodies for you to sacrifice unless you happen to have like Orcish Bowmasters in your hand. So I suspect it might be a bit too hard to cast. Outside of that, in the defensive slots, like I mentioned, there's Defense Grid, there's the Red Blast, and also Dispel, I think, is pretty powerful. These were cards I was considering. As well, there's Gamble. I'm not personally on Gamble just because Azula doesn't have a good amount of card advantage, so it's really hard to get the most out of the card just because your hands are so small. This isn't like some Rog Thras list where your hand should stay pretty full. So I've personally found Gamble to be kind of like awkward, so it comes in and out of my list, but it's pretty close to making it. Other than that, there's some extra copy spells like Return to Favor you can consider in this place of like Untimely Malfunction or something like that. And then some extra counter magic like Stubborn Denial, Dispel, Disruptor Flute, that kind of thing. But yeah, here's a list as it stands. So if I disable the tags, it's kind of what it looks like. 35 instants, 9 sorceries, 9 creatures. I think last time I was over like almost 12 or 13 creatures, so we've really trimmed it down. Looking a bit more like a Rog Thras list. A lot of the cards that were a little more, let's say, fun have come out of the list. But the CMC actually went down overall. I think last time we were hovering at about 1.39. This time we're at 1.38 in spite of shoving in an extra 5 mana spell. And if you look at the curve, this is our mana value curve, so really just hovering around 1 or 2 mana for the most part. Okay, so since this is a follow-up, let's do a playtest run and look at some opening hands. So, first opening hand, we have an Ad Naus, which is promising, but we only have one land, and then we have an Abandoned Attachments and a Snapcaster with a Force. So this hand is interesting. We are going to see one, potentially two, three, four extra cards. So if we find another land, this is a turn 3 ad nauseum, assuming it's a black source. So this is okay. I think if you're in a more interactive table where you need to have some kind of disruption in the early turns as well, this is a pretty good hand because you're going to have access to Force Pitch Snapcaster. That turns off your gifts line, but whatever, Snapcaster is just a value piece anyway. So I would consider keeping this, but I don't think it's the most powerful hand that you can have. Like, we could play this out, but I would say overall it's fine. There's probably like a 20 to 30% fizzle rate on this hand. Like, if you never draw a land, this hand's obviously kind of ass. Um, when we're pitching, for this hand right now, when we're pitching to Abandoned Attachments, I'd be pitching Redirect Lightning. Before we go to our next hand, we can just play it out for fun, I guess. So I would draw a Tarnished Citadel. So this hand would probably be fine. You want to keep drawing. I think we don't want to draw lands, so I'd probably lead on Verdant Catacombs. Fetch for a, what's it called? Underground Sea. Cast Soaring. Pass. Play a land. So here would be pretty interesting. So we can't cast Azula, quite obviously. We don't have two sources. So we have 4 mana, so we can abandon attachments, hold up redirect lightning at instant speed, or we can set up VV. So if we set up VV, then we have to pitch. Oh, well, we have the option to pitch Snapcaster or abandon attachments at that point. Because if we're gonna Gnaws off anyway, we're gonna have like the extra 2 cards from abandoned attachment doesn't really matter anymore. So I'd probably develop VV here, taking 3. Oh, sorry, I'm supposed to be at 39. Taking 3 to make a red pip. Develop VV. Obviously, we look kind of scary at this point. Next turn, got a Fierce Guardianship, which is not that helpful here. So we can just Fierce Pitch, uh, or Force of Will pitch Fierce Guardianship now. So we didn't hit our land drop, which kind of sucks, but we can cast any spell to generate mana with VV, so probably Abandoned Attachments, floating 1 colorless, Resolves, pitch, um, pitch Fierce Guardianship, draw 2. There's our land, and there's an inactive Opal. VV gets a counter, right? So if 1 colorless floating, play an Opal, VV gets a counter. Opal is not on, but now VV makes 2 mana, and we have 1 colorless floating. So we can go blue and red, blue, red, black, and colorless. Activate VV. That costs us 1 more life. Cast Azula. Pass a turn with Force. And next turn, in combat, we'll get a protected. Well, not protected, but we might get a protected ad nauseum holding Redirect Lightning and Force of Will. So not a bad start. Pretty good hand overall for a 1 lander. Alright, let's restart. Second hand, we have a Opal that's not active until our Signet's up, and no other action. So 4 lands, that's a little more than we'd like to see. Typically 2 or 3 is kind of like all we want to see for the course of the game. Our turn 1 is not that great, because we couldn't go Opal plus Bauble. So if we're early in seat order, I would consider this. Just because next turn you will have an active Opal, so like let's map the turn without drawing cards, right? So play Command Tower, play Opal, or I think actually you should play Verdant and fetch because you don't want to see lands. Again, I'm going to be fetching Underground Sea here just because of the mana rocks I have. I'd like to fetch, please, thank you. Close and shuffle. So if you're early in turn order, casting an early Vexing Bauble shuts off other people's fast mana. Like it's hard for them to, they're not allowed to deploy their own Mox Opals or their Chrome Mox, Mox Amber, that kind of thing. In the past, also Mana Vault or Mana Crypt, sorry. Because then next turn, if we pretend we played the turn out, so we would have drawn a card. So we go to next turn, we drew a land, unfortunately, but here we have access to 2 additional mana here. So this is a turn 3 Azula basically with 1 mana up and 1 card, but overall you can see like this hand didn't really do that much. So I'd probably consider keeping this on like a mull to 6 or 5, pitching 1 or 2 of the lands. But as you can see, like in this hand, because Azula doesn't give us card advantage, like we're gonna get to turn 3, cast Azula with 1 more blind draw. Okay, so like we would have had nothing basically, just Azula plus Otawara and an Underworld Breach with nothing to cast. So you can see how like Azula not having any card advantage is like if this was Kefka, you'd be refilling your hand when you cast her. But Azula is not Kefka, so you can see how these hands are not that good. Let's do a couple more hands. This is a hand with fast mana but no black source. Pretty risky hand to keep. If you find black mana, like you're off to the races, kind of. But at the same time, like your black mana is temporary. This is a pretty risky hand. I probably would not keep this on my first 7. On second 7 or 6, I'd definitely keep it. On 6, I'd probably... You're almost always putting Invoke Calamity to the bottom. It's just like too hard to guarantee you're going to cast Azula in this hand, and Invoke Calamity is mainly good with Azula, though it's still a fine combo piece to go off with Adnos and that kind of thing. If you're on 5, I would still keep this. Probably, as the number of cards in your hand dwindle, the emphasis on Fairy Mastermind goes up, so I'd probably pitch... It's hard to say. Like, Dark Ritual might be important to actually cast Azla, which might be like the only way you're getting out of this hand. So I'd probably pitch Invoke Calamity first if you're on 6, and then on 5, I think I would pitch Vampiric and Invoke Calamity, just because you don't know when you're going to get that black mana. It's possible that Dark Ritual is worse than Vamp. Kind of depends, because you can Vamp for probably not Gifts Ungiven, but like let's say you're going to 5. If you're going to 5, then this hand the game plan is definitely to cast Azla and get value. So you could consider keeping Vamp so that when you get your first black swords, you're able to find like a big score or something and just draw 3, discard 1, make 4 treasures. That seems kind of reasonable. You can't go over. You could be able to cast the gifts ungiven probably, but you can't guarantee you'll be able to assemble a win with the gifts. Maybe like a breach line instead, since we'll be operating off Izzet mana, but definitely a more dangerous hand. Okay, mulligan again. This hand seems fine at a glance. Makes a bunch of mana, but not too much else. But there's a Yogg Will. So this hand has no game plan. It does make 2 mana early on for potentially a turn 2 Azula with no action. considering that we're making a turn to Azula, probably like Swan Song is the card I'm pitching to Chromox. Kind of interesting, but again, this is a hand with no game plan. So I'd consider keeping this on second 7, probably not my first 7, just because, yeah, there's not too much to do. We can play it out. Let's say, like, I think I would keep this in second 7, so we'll just assume I'm not seat 1 or not seat 4 every game. So first turn, breach. Okay, so now we have like a game plan here, right? So starting town, and then I'm gonna cast a Chromox, pitching my Swan Song. Mox taps for blue, lose a life, strike it rich, make a treasure, pass. Next turn, we drew Soul Ring, which is actually not helpful to this hand. Because I'll only be able to make 2 colors of mana right now. So, but at least, like, I guess you can cast it. Cast Soul Ring, right? And then, I guess you should go like this, actually. So cast Soul Ring off your blue mana. And then if you want to, you can strike it rich. Flashback. And now you have 2 treasures. I guess this is easier to see. Now you have 2 treasures. And you pass the turn. And next turn, now you have like a little more of something. But you can see how we didn't draw a land, right? We draw a Soul Ring, and that was like much more awkward. But even if we get Azula out now, like let's say we had drawn this land instead of the Soul Ring and we drew the Soul Ring now, and we had an Azula on the board and no treasures, we have nothing to cast with her. It's like, hooray, we get to double up a Cabal Ritual into nothing. So, not that helpful. So you can see how these hands that cast Azula, they're all risky unless you have some additional draw in them. Right, let's do one last hand, one lander, a lot of uncastable garbage. This one's clearly a mulligan to me. You can cast a Mystical Tutor and Flusterstorm, but I think that's not good enough. I wouldn't keep this unless I was on a pretty low mulligan, like probably a mulligan to 4, where I'd keep Mindbreak, Fluster, Mystical, Tarnished Citadel. Potentially maybe keeping gifts, since you can Mystical Tutor for a Dark Ritual, try to like give some given back into the game, but I think that's not good enough. So I'd only keep this hand on like a mull to 4. Final hand, it looks like a one-lander, but Sink into Stupor is actually a land, so we have 2 lands. And we have half the combo. And we have a Dark Writ. So we have an Ard Mesa, so the fetch here, to me, is quite clearly bad lands. This is also where it'd be nice to have a Raucous Theater. But we can fetch our Thundering Falls here, but it should be bad lands here. Bad lands into turn 2 Wishclaw. And then we have Wishclaw for a game plan, because we have Demonic Consult and Underworld Breach, so we can actually use Consult instead of finding Thoracle. We can use Consult to try to find Lion's Eye Diamond and go off that way. Like, if you can see the plan, like, you're gonna cast Wishclaw on turn 2. Then the turn after, we can try to Consult for Brain Freeze, I guess. Or, I think I'd rather Consult for... Yeah, I'd rather Consult for Lion's Eye Diamond, because then we can find Wishclaw Talisman after pitching our hand to Lion's Eye Diamonds. We can use Wishclaw to find Brain Freeze and then go off from there. So this is a fine hand, right? I'll just show the mapping. First turn draw. Oh, okay, I don't like that. Thank you. First turn draw Imp Seal, which is pretty nice actually. So now we can even consider fetching something. So we crack. Here we want Badlands. Close and shuffle. Now we can Imperial Seal. What do I want to Imp Seal? So I have a land drop for next turn. I already have a Dark Ritual. I even have Force Fodder. Maybe I could Imp Seal for more mana. Or is there a way for me to go off next turn? If I want to have a potential ad nauseum backup, I guess I could tutor for Cabal Ritual, but I think that's not unnecessary. Here, probably like commit to one game plan, right? So if you're committing to the breach line, then I think you should tutor for a pact, so you have something to pitch to your sink into stupor. Or you have something to pitch to your force will without having to pitch your land. So probably like find Pact of Negation. Or if we're doing that, maybe it should just be any blue spell, in which case I want to leave Pact in the library, because Pact is not actually castable if something happens to my force. So I just take the least castable counter spell. we're not going for we're not going for our commander, so which means Fierce is kind of attractive to pitch. But at the same time, we're going to be trying to bin our library. It might be good to have it live in the yard at some point. So just any blue spell. So something like Abandoned Attachments would be fine to just put on top, right? So then let's go to our next turn. We draw the Abandoned Attachments that we knew about. Take 3 to cast a Soporific Things, or play a Soporific Things. Cast Witchclaw. Go to our next turn. We drew a land, thankfully. Play land. Play land here, and you should crack first before trying to go off, in case your target goes off. It's a marsh flats, so probably like Underground Sea again. Or am I worried about red sources? Yeah, black source and a red source. I think Underground Sea is valid. You can also go for Volk, or not Volk. You can also go. You can go for Blood Crypt. I think UC is correct. Go for UC, right? And now we can Dark Ritual, make free black, right? We have 3 black floating, cast Consult, 1 black floating. So exile top 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Alright, we did not exile Lion's Eye Diamond. We have lost access to Jessica's Will. So we're going to draw until we find Breach, our LED. Okay, this is going to be a bit tedious. I should probably just drag them out onto the board on Nox PLA. That's not LED. Alright, looks like it's pretty deep. Where is my... Oh, we exiled Brain Freeze. Rest in pieces. What are we gonna do? Alright. That is a little awkward. But I don't think it's possible for us to play around that with this particular line. Hmm. Is there a way to play around this? I guess there is. I'm floating 2 red mana, right? Or I'm floating 2 black mana from a dark ritual. So we should have cast Breach first. We should have cast Breach first, and then tutored for Brain Freeze. We don't even have to cast the Brain Freeze. So cast Breach, 1 black floating. We have black blue left. And then used, I guess, black to tutor for Freeze. Put Freeze into our hand and then cast him on a consultation. So let's pretend we're not stupid, and we did that. Alright, sorry about that. See, I'm still practicing on my Grixis lines. So not the most proficient, I will admit. Okay. Our Lion's Eye Diamond is very deep in the library. Oh, okay, there's Lion's Eye Diamond. Lion's Eye Diamond goes to hand. And apparently I accidentally drew a card. Okay, so we went pretty deep. So I'm kind of glad, actually, that you got to see that sequencing error there. Right now we have no mana floating. Cast Lion's Eye Diamond. Crack for 3 blue. Pitching my hand. Now we have 3 blue floating. Cast Lion's Eye Diamond from the yard. It's going to be a little tight. Oh, I don't want to view the card, I would like to view the yard. Exile. Ritual. Marsh Flats Mesa. Probably not even Ritual. I guess like Imp Seal. Or maybe Consult. I'm definitely not consulting again. Storm is 2, right? So 2 extra copies. Gonna mill myself. And did I exile my Thoracle? I think I did. Yeah, it's in there. So that's a little awkward. Mill myself. 9 cards. 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9. Go up to Storm is 5. Alright. Looks like we actually killed ourselves because our Demonic Consult was a bit too deep. So, risky line. But you can see, like, if we found our Lion's Eye Diamond maybe like 20 cards earlier, instead of exiling my whole library, we would have had some possibility. So right now we have Breach with our yard. So we're gonna die if we pass the turn, basically. So is there a way for us to win? We're gonna have to generate quite a bit of storm. And just try and storm our opponents out. So we have 15 cards in the yard. 3 more cast Lion's Eye Diamond. Storm is 4. Crack Lion's Eye Diamond. For 3 blue again. So we're up to 5 blue. Brain Freeze. Storm is 5. So it's milling 18 cards. Mills me out. 1 more loop. So we can loop 3 or 4 more times, basically, but then we're only going to be able to mill for about like 30 to 40, which is not enough to win the game. And then we're going to pass the turn and die. So, final hand was a bit of a fizzle. Unfortunate. But these things will happen. But I think one of the other hands earlier was basically just a deterministic win. Maybe with that in mind, I should probably try and play out a hand that actually has a win. This is looking like a potential turn. This is turn 3 Azula. There's nothing particularly special about it. Right? It's just land. You can pitch Spirit Guide potentially for mana if you really, really want to cast. In this case, Signet is fine, right? And then you go into turn 3 with land, cast Signet, go. But you're gonna have 2 blind draws to draw something for Azula. In this case, you won't, right? And then the turn after, you got a Petal. I'm sorry, this is on top. And then here you cast Azula. Took like 3 damage along the way. So turn 3 Azula with nothing to do except cast 2 Lightning Bolts. Next. So, bit of a mid-hand. What does a good hand look like? This is another fine. This is a fine blind hand because Azula comes out pretty fast here. Because here we have land, Mox. What is my Mox pitching? It's between Ragavan and Strike It Rich. Kind of depends on seat order. If I'm early in seat order, more likely to pitch Strike It Rich. Otherwise, I'll pitch Ragavan. The talisman is not the correct talisman. It's not a red talisman. Otherwise, I'm definitely pitching, I think, Strike It Rich because the upside's just higher. But here we just developed Signet. Let's say we pitch Ragavan. Right, next turn, land. This makes red, this makes red blue, this makes black, right? Crack for a duel. Marsh flats get Underground Sea. Cast Azula, right? Next turn I have double consult. So this is a protected double consult line, right? Because Azula moves to combat, we add 2 red. 2 red is floating. And then we can double consult here, use one of our black sources. Name Thoracle. 3, 4, 5, 6. So we're not actually going to have access to a Mindbreak Trap because one of our red mana is going to fade afterwards, unfortunately, unless something crazy happens. But it is a turn 4 win attempt here, right? Especially because we're going to have to use blue to cast the actual Thoracle. Oh wait, we found Thoracle. Thoracle to hand. Now the original consult resolves. Name, you are already dead. Or you are, or maybe like not dead after all. Anyway, move move all to exile. So you'll end up like this. We still have 2 red floating in the combat phase, by the way, but we have nothing to do with it. So, is it possible to protect the win? That's the real question. Well, no, because we need one of the consults to exile our library. What we could do is go for Snapcaster. But if we go for Snapcaster, this is a red Chrome Monks, remember. If we go for Snapcaster, I guess we can turn the red Chrome Monks into blue mana. If we go for Snapcaster, we won't have double blue, unfortunately. To cast the actual Thoracle, this line involves us casting Thoracle manually. So we only have access to, um, technically, 2 blue pips, because this Signet doesn't tap in the way that you want it to in this case. In this particular game, the Signet would have actually been better served as a Talisman of Dominance, because you can see here at this point in sequencing, after casting Azula, on turn 3, having access to Strike It Rich off the red Mox would give us access to 3 blue pips, which means we could go for a Snapcaster line, but then we wouldn't have a black pip to Snapcaster cast or Demonic Consultation. There's only one blue and or black land here. We've already used another blue and or black land here, so that doesn't work. But it is a naked, unprotected win. Just go, like, in this case, just have a red floating when you go for your main 2, Thassa's Oracle, win the game with an empty library. Alright, well, anyhow, hopefully that was illuminating in some ways. I, too, am still learning this list. But that was version 2 of Azula with our changes 3 weeks in. It seems like people have been they were pretty excited when Azula was previewed, and this is a pretty popular commander based on the statistics, but it doesn't seem like anyone's actually playing her in any gameplay videos or continuing to make deck techs or updating deck techs. So I thought I'd at least make an effort to update mine, even though obviously my channel's not a huge name out there. With that said, I hope you guys enjoyed, and happy gaming. Cheers.